You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Welcome back. Another episode of RX Radio. We're here with Captain Glanson, Blundstones, whatever the fuck those shoes are. I'm cool with shoes on the table, but I'm just not cool with those shoes. You can believe them on the table. They look like water shoes.
They do not.
They do. They literally. There's someone in a Good Life Fitness right now in an Aquafit class that's wearing those. 1,000. They got fucking floaties on their elbows. And I look at you when you wear those. I put like floaties on your elbows.
These things are great. They slip on. They add 10 pounds to my bench press. Channeling my inner Katie Lang.
Who the hell is Katie Lang?
We should probably not get into it.
Okay, but they're like Timberland's effeminate little brother. Like that's what they are. They're from what?
Actually, they're Australian.
Oh, because you've lost me right there.
Equestrian boots.
They're not.
Yeah, they are. That's
I'm
exactly what they are.
Stupid helmets.
Yeah,
You
Blundstone
look
is
as if you need a helmet when you wear those shoes.
Blundstone's the Australian boot company. These come from horse riding.
So Blundstone, not a sponsor of this podcast.
Blundstone sponsor this podcast.
No fucking way. All right, episode today all about exercise intensity. One of the things that probably pisses us off the most is how much, and it's no pun intended, but how much weight people give to prescribing intensities and not understanding the role intensity plays in your training. So this episode is all about that. What day is it? Well, we have California Intensive coming up. If you guys are in California, San Francisco Bay Area, San Jose, Santa Clara, the upper body intensive January 15th, 16th. So you can register for that online, www.pre-script.com. Newsletter also up on the website. So we're doing a weekly Friday newsletter. If you want more rants like this between me and Killian and all of our coaches at Prescript, we're dishing those out Friday in your inbox. Good piece of information to take into the weekend. Sign up for that newsletter. It is completely free and it's on the website as well. So head on over there. Without further ado, Lunderjack Productions, Killian Hamilton and his stupid shoes, exercise intensity, RX Radio. We'll see you next week.
You know what people...
Oh boy, go.
You know what people don't know how to do?
Drive?
Well, that, yes, I experienced 36 minutes of that. But try hard. Like
I think people think they're trying hard.
Like I teach a whole course on skill acquisition, which I think we could just rename to learn how to try hard, because that's the skill that people are missing.
I don't think if you took a straw poll, let's say you asked 10 people, even in the gym, that we could collectively in a room go, I don't think he's trying hard. And you ask them, I think 10 out of 10 people would tell you that they're trying hard.
I totally agree.
But like it's the subjectivity versus objectivity.
Yeah.
Which is tough, which is really going to be like the center point to the conversation of intensity. But like, because I think it's the inability for people like to default to truth in a weird way, because the way I look at intensity is, oh, you're just lying to yourself.
Yeah.
Right? But we're really good at spotting people that tell the truth, but we're not good at spotting liars.
That's true.
Which is like kind of concerning. Like we're almost not better than random at spotting liars, but we're good at people telling. Like we're good. Like okay, that guy's definitely telling the truth, and we can get those. We can select those above average next to random. But if it's people lying, we're not good at figuring out who's lying.
I think it's because we're all lying.
Explain.
So it's like you said, like everybody kind of lies about like how hard they try, or everyone's kind of like creating a false narrative outside objective truth about something.
Right.
So when we encounter someone else doing it, I think we're also muddied by the noise of the things we tell ourselves.
Okay.
Like there are too many things that could be true. Mm-hmm. There are fewer things that could be an objective lie.
Yeah.
Because we understand how people perceive things.
Right.
So when someone tells you something and you go, it might be true.
Right.
Like when someone says they injured their leg, you're like, he might have injured his leg.
Yeah. But there are data points off the back end of that where you're like, nah, leg's probably not injured. Like if you tear a muscle, you train that muscle 2 days later.
Yeah.
Objectively, scientifically, we're thinking, nah, that was probably not injured. That was probably a lie.
But I think you and I trend towards the like not worrying about, number one, things we say.
Right.
and also like not entirely worrying about how other people feel or perceive things. We kind of go like you said, like the data point proves that that's a lie.
Yeah. But survey says, bing, lie.
But I think a lot of people kind of play with kid gloves. They're like, well, because I can't objectively see pain,
right.
I have to err on the side of this is pain for this person.
Right.
Where I think you and I both go like, it's not pain.
Yeah.
Like it's not an injury. Like I had my arm twisted beyond belief in a direction I can't comprehend yesterday. And I went to the gym unable to hold the steering wheel. And a couple sets of bicep curls later, I could bench 95%. For someone else, they might go, injured my elbow yesterday. Got a shoulder injury at the beginning of the day, taking a week off of bench press. But for me, I'm like, well, this is really uncomfortable, but I'm assuming it's not an injury.
Yeah, I think all you need to do is try to disprove your...
Correct.
Because like I always think of religion, right? Like, well, you can't prove he doesn't exist. It's like, really? The whole walking on water thing, the water to wine, I got to sit here and fucking teach you about states of matter? Like, come on, man. Like, get the fuck out of here. Yeah, and I think that's a lot of people just are so timid to... Yeah, I gotta try is like the word that keeps coming to mind. Like test. People are so hard, like so timid to just test the waters. Like if something hurts, doesn't mean that you can't do something.
I also think of like injury as the end of the line, being like, if I have injured my elbow acutely, doing something else cannot push it past the injury it's currently at. It's only going to disprove that it is injured.
Right.
Like worst case scenario, it's still fucked up.
Right.
Right. Best case scenario, it's not fucked up. It's like, I don't get it.
Yeah, it far like the people who like do their ACLs. It's like my ACL's already torn.
Yeah.
Like I'm going back in the game. It's like you got to respect the logic.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's like what is the cost benefit ratio when you think so objectively about it? It's like worst case, you get a very drastic, very abrupt. Like, well, I was right. Great, people love being right.
Yeah.
Or if you're wrong, you can still go and train.
Yeah.
Which is like I don't see the trepidation around trying.
I think it's to find an external constraint to their own success.
Oh, okay. So
Like-
you just think it's people don't want to be successful.
I think so. Well, I think it's the fear of success, right? It's like if I can injure my elbow today, I'm not on the hook for my performance for the next 3 weeks.
Right. Elbow got injured.
Yeah. Self-limiting beliefs, right?
Interesting.
Because like how many people, when you just talk to them passively about their lifting, do they illustrate to you this like yarn of injuries they've had for the previous 18 months that have innervated kind of where they are today?
Right.
And it's like, well, I just asked how fucking lifting is going, man.
Yeah. I guess that if that boils to like the forefront of your subconscious, it's like lifting is just fueling your complaining habit at this point. I don't really want to hear it. Yeah, I mean it's tough because in the conversation around, especially from a coaching perspective, like the conversation around how do you measure and effectively from measuring progress intensity when you're getting lied to constantly. Everyone is lying about everything all the time, and that's my thing. Like I default to guilt. I don't default to truth. Like this person is lying to me until I have enough data points to prove that they're telling the truth.
Yeah, it's like House, like the show House MD. Like his thing is, well, the tagline of the show used to be "Everybody lies," because everyone would come in with something, and the whole show was him disproving the story they originally told and finding out the actual thing was like they huff gasoline. And he's like, "Oh, it's not lupus. You just huff gas, you dumb addict." But I think that's the same thing with like clients who lie all the time, right? Like I hate playing 21 questions with somebody about like how they feel.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, why don't you just tell me?
Yeah. It's like Kramer when he does the movie phone. Why don't you just tell me which movie you'd like to see?
I play that scene out in my head every time somebody messages me about like something not feeling right, being weaker, something else, yada yada. I literally play like, why don't you just tell me what you did yesterday? Because like inevitably it's always something. It's like, oh, my elbow is like really fucking killing me. And it's like, we don't, what?
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, I'm rowing 3,000 kilometers a day. It's like, well, like, what are we doing here? Like, get off the rowing machine, you crazy psychopath.
Yeah, and that's the hard part. Like, I think it's the hardest part of coaching. And it's like setting an exclusion criteria that matches like just honest people with honest coaches. Because there's nothing worse. Like, there's nothing worse from an outcome perspective than a dishonest coach and a dishonest client. And dishonest isn't like they're like lying on their taxes and cheating on their wife,
Yeah.
like that kind of shit. It's just like a coach that coddles someone that needs to be like held accountable is lying to that person.
Yes.
Right. And a client that is, lying to themselves and ultimately lying to their coach about their subjective experience with exercise. It's like, that is the most frustrating thing to watch. Like, I've been working with this guy for X number of years. And it's like, great, you both have just been jerking each other off while you paid him over a spreadsheet for like however many years. And it's, I think at that point, the coach is equally as guilty as the client. Like, just coaches need to get comfortable with firing clients.
Yeah.
And I think until that, because there'll always be a market for, and people will just go find a coach that will coddle them until someone realizes that, like, wait, no coaches are going to want to work with me because I'm just lying. It's like, yeah, go figure it out, right? And that's just, it's kind of like it's like a relationship. Like, there are people who are just perpetually single. It's like, that's probably a you problem, right? Like, I love this single chick, like, there's just no good men out there. It's like, you're trash. Like, that's a fucking you problem. And it's the same thing in the coaching environment. If we had it so that coaches were, and it was like a common accepted practice, be like, yeah, no, I had to let that guy go. Which in our circle is like, yeah, no, he was just like, wasn't getting check-in videos on time. He was trying to put the ball in my court, wasn't doing X, Y, and Z. But I would say in the market as a whole, coaches, probably just cling to their clients for their money.
Yeah.
But it's like, if you can grow your business to the point where you can have the power to be like, look, man, this is reflecting bad on me. Like, you got to hit the bricks. And then you could have clients just waiting out in the cold being like, no coach wants to work with me. And if coaches would talk to, like, hey man, just a heads up, like, work with this guy, be mindful of X, Y, and Z. And coaches kind of have like camaraderie, which they don't. Like, most coaches in like the open space are like, they get a client like, he worked with this guy, fuck this guy, I'm gonna be different. It's like, and if you're diligent, you probably should be the same because the client's the exact same.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing.
So I don't know, because it's always tough. Like, do you have a strategy that you go with when it comes to, like, you have to do something, like you have to prescribe an intensity somehow. Like, what's your go-to? Or if you just selected so many nihilistic people that are just like, no one lies?
I wish I got nihilistic people, but I seem to get the opposite.
Really? That makes me so happy. Just think how annoyed you must be on a daily basis.
But I think at the end of the day, like, I think a value I bring is in like not coddling people, because just like not understanding a benefit to it. And I never, like, that's the thing, I don't advertise my service as a person who does anything else but prescribe sets, reps, and watch video.
Yeah.
Because like, I can do everything from exercise selection and intensity and how exercises are programmed, right? Like, I don't need to have a heart-to-heart with you. Like, I don't need to be a therapist because it's not my scope of practice. Just as much as reading imaging isn't my scope of practice, waxing philosophical about goal orientation, not my scope of practice either, right? Like, I'm really good at doing sets and reps.
Yeah.
And like, the people who follow the sets and reps and intensity seem to PR all the time. Right. So it's like, I don't see where I need to go outside of my scope to have an extended conversation to motivate you to do X, Y, or Z, or explain something a different way. Like, it's a big frustration for me, is like, I'm not understanding that. Can you explain it a different way? When the statement's like, hey, I'm just going to need you to add more weight to the bar.
Yeah, I don't really understand.
And they're like, can you explain what you mean? It's like, I just need you to put weight on the bar and just squat it and stop thinking.
Yeah.
Don't think about it. Don't coach yourself. Because I think we're in this era where people get so much information that it's hilarious. There's like a time delay, like live television, between when a client takes a video and when it arrives in my inbox to watch it, in which I know they've watched it and they've self-coached themselves prior to giving it to me, and they're playing a confirmation game of what I say. And if I go, yeah, looks great, go up, they're like, are you sure? But these other things happen. And I'm really curious how they know, because they're just supposed to lift the weight, not watch the video.
Yeah.
And the first month I work with people, I don't get them to video anything. Just do the program.
Yeah.
I don't want you to know what it looks like.
Overcoaching definitely seems to be, to me, overcoaching is one of the most predatory things that coaches do, because it's tough to generalize, but like, people who are looking for coddling and people who coddle people, whether they do it subliminally or consciously, that to me is so predatory, because you're making that person dependent on you for things that they're not paying you for.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're not, Like if I just go ask a guy for directions and he gives me heroin, it's like, oh, man, I really like the directions that I got. It's like, well, it's not what you came for. It's just like, tell me where the fucking Tim Hortons is so I can get my Beebs donuts and fuck off, right? But it's like, well, now they got you hooked on the needle, right? It's like, wow, now he's a guy I can turn to. It's like, tell me how much weight to put on the bar. Tell me how many times to move the bar. Tell me what days to not train. That's all I really need out of a coach. And I think most people just aren't good enough at those basics that they need to extend into like, so what did you eat for breakfast? It's like, maybe it wasn't the fucking Cheerios, man. Maybe it's their performance tanked because your reps and sets suck.
Yeah.
Right? Not to say that doesn't have a factor in it, but people start to look at like, all right, if I can improve this person's performance, I don't know, 30 or 40% under my watchful eye. It's like the majority of that should be, I mean, unless your client's some degenerate derelict that lives on the streets, like the majority of their improvement should be in really organizing their training.
Yeah.
But people are like, so tell me about yourself. It's like, tell me about your lifting history. Tell me about your background, but like, don't tell me about your relationship. Like, I'm not gonna help you move. Fuck off.
And there's like people like track clients' moods and feelings about a training session. Like, how did you feel about this? Like, what? It's like, don't. But also, it's like, I think it skews the lens of what quality coaching is.
Right.
Because someone goes through that experience and perhaps they don't get strong, right? Perhaps they do and it works for them and they get strong. But maybe the coaching, the actual reps and sets is poor, but the emotional side is like, quote unquote, stronger, but they don't get strong. So they leave this coddling coach because they're like, it was great, he's great, but I didn't get stronger.
Yeah.
Then they look for somebody who gets people strong. And maybe the guy who gets people strong is just Boroshenko and he's just throwing numbers at people.
Right.
And they go to that coach and they're getting these numbers that would work if they did it, but because they're not getting this out of scope emotional side of things, now the coach who actually knows how to coach a client looks like they don't provide the same value.
Right.
Because they're not there every moment of the day.
Yeah, it's like I flip it, right? I was like, I don't talk to my shrink and ask him about my reps and sets.
No.
So I don't go to my coach and ask him about my feelings.
Yeah, and
right?
I think it does a large disservice to what this industry is by muddying the two.
And I don't think, and people will hear this and they'll look at us and be like, well, they're just not appreciating like the mental health side. And I air quote it because it's like, if there's three people in like the developed world who understand the depths of where mental health goes from a very personal level, it's probably the three people in this room.
100%.
Right? Like, I've seen and heard of people do things in our immediate circle that would pull the hair back of most people that grew up a nice North American life. And so people might hear that and be like, well, they're just trying to be hard ass. It's like, no. Like, we've all done our time in therapy and we're not devaluing that. We're also saying that coaches aren't therapists.
And that's what I think I'm saying is like, I don't entertain it because not my scope of practice.
Yeah.
Just like reading imaging isn't.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if someone put an x-ray in front of me, I would just be like, there's white and there's black. And there's a cool shape there.
Yeah. It's like
a cloud. I'd be reading clouds. You know, there's a dog and there's a castle.
Yeah, it's like, I don't, if you have an impacted molar, don't bring that to me.
Yeah.
If you have problems with your girl, don't bring that to me either. But I think it stems from an inability to provide value from an actual reps, sets, progression, adaptation, optimization standpoint that leaves coaches scrambling to provide value. And they're actually, I think, doing people a huge disservice. Like, I've had people where it's like, I don't think chiropractic is for you or the way I practice is for you. I think you should try acupuncture. I think you should go to a PT. I think you should do this. I think you should go over the hill in Santa Cruz and put fucking amethyst on your forehead. Like, you're nuts. Take your fucking hemp shoes and get the fuck out of my office. But it's because I'm confident if I create the right exclusion criteria, if I can match someone, you're good. Yeah, 2 visits, you're gone. See you later. Awesome. If you hurt yourself again, here's my number. I don't want to see you. But where coaches are like, I don't know, scrambling, desperate. And a lot of times I honestly think it's not malicious, but it's the old Costanza. Yeah. It's not a lie if you believe it, because they themselves are defaulting to the truths of the stories that they tell themselves. And it's like they pat themselves on the back and they have this cohort of like codependent clientele that are just like, oh my God, he's so great. Like we talk for, dude, if you're a client of mine and we talk for like an hour a week, that's the last time I ever talked to you. Or I'm sending you a bill. That's not because I've done something wrong in my programming that needs an hour to dissect over the phone. And if it's like, tell me about your day, it's like, do you have friends? Go talk to them. Do you want to are your friends good at programming? No? Okay, then that's why I'm here. Yeah. So it's really like, I mean, we're kind of straying off the topic of intensity slightly, but it's as important a conversation to have as intensity.
Well, because I think it builds back to intensity, right? Because I think the curse or the plague of the novice lifter is like understanding, and like not to get into the science of it, but like the differentiation of bar speed and velocity from like training and practicing something to something that's maximal. And I think athletes get this because they're just exposed to the constraint of a weight room where there's a sports scientist and an S&C and some other guy with a spreadsheet, and they're like applying direct velocities to somebody and explaining what the purpose is. Like they're going to move 0.6, 0.75 for a really heavy lift, and they're going to move like 1.3 for a light lift. But you have these novice lifters who can't differentiate where warming up for a movement stops and where training for a movement starts. And like there's going to be a drastic difference in bar speed. And I think unfortunately bar speed, which goes towards intensity, is so tied early on to lifters in terms of like what is a good rep. It's like, oh well, the bar speed was consistent, but it's like I don't want my warm-up bar speed to be consistent with my top set bar speed, because that means I'm still warming up. Like how am I lifting 90% at an equivalent velocity as I am 30%? Yeah. Like that's impossible in any other sport but a barbell sport. Like no one prescribes med ball throws at the same velocity as heavy loaded back squat. That would be insane. Right. That'd be the lightest back squat or the heaviest med ball throw. Like they both cannot exist in the same field. So I think it's like kind of what we're talking about, where clients have to, you know, bridge the gap between what is objectively sets and reps and what is subjectively like, you know, maybe emotional support, is the idea that like at some point in the weight room, it'll get challenging. And when it gets challenging, it's actually when it's working in my mind. And like, I know that's reductionist, but you and me and like Code trained like 2 years ago now. And I remember we're on the leg press with like 7 plates. Like that's pretty fucking heavy. And the first reps weren't heavy. Get through like 5, get through 6 reps. But like 7 and 8, I was like, oh, this is distinctly a different set now. Like this is entirely different intensity based on the pre-exhaust of the first 5 reps. And Code's like, set starts now. And I was like, oh, this is what it has to get to. Yeah. And like that's a defining moment in my own lifting. I'm like, oh, this is where it starts. So inevitably everything I do has to get to this point of intensity in order for progress to be made.
And I think intensity should be a byproduct.
Correct.
Right? Like intensity is a byproduct of density, frequency. Basically, it's what you're left with. Intensity is the variable that you solve for by filling in all of the other unknowns in the lifting equation. Yeah. Right? Like if you have sets, it's funny, we reduce it to sets and reps and kind of like this passing sort of, it's just sets and reps. But it's like, that's a lot. Like that's everything. Insane. That's equating for so much, or that's solving for so much of the equation. So you're like, all right, you're gonna signal to me by purely, and there's so much more to this, but purely the sets and reps alone are gonna bring me 80-90% of the way of me gauging intensity of the lift. Right? If I can see the sets and reps over the course of a day, it's like, that's the thing, I don't necessarily need intensities. I just need like essentially volume. Mm-hmm. They're not saying volume like I need a lot of reps or a lot of, I just need to know how many of a thing I'm going to do and how many things am I going to do that day, and the things that I did yesterday and the things I did before. And it's like I'm kind of just left with no return address, full send. Like that's kind of how I leave every exercise. Now the ability for me to fucking send it will be just a byproduct, right? Like my 4th exercise of a lower body session, if it's 4 sets of 15 reps on a leg press, it's like, well, I'm going to have to adjust my intensity, as intensity is a measure of the amount of load that we're using, to fit the constraint of my, like the physiological environment of me at that particular point in time in the workout. So like a lot of people try and go like beautiful mind with intensity. And if you look at, and to me, you know, success leaves clues. Like every strong person I've trained with is like, that either felt good, or they look at it and be like, oh, that felt kind of shit. They look at it, it's like, yeah, well, it moved. Like I didn't drop the weight, so I'm going to go heavier. Yeah. And then they just kind of get really good at picking that percentage jump or the increase in their RPE or RIR and all that. But it's just like, I feel like intensity is such a, no shit, right? And if it's not, it's probably bad programming.
Yeah.
which is one thing that I don't understand. It's like, I want to do 4x3 at 5 RIR. Go home.
Yeah.
Go the fuck home.
Yeah.
Like, or don't come in at all. Because
Yeah.
it's what? Oh, it's a technique day. It's like, it's not about how fast you lift. I mean, I understand that's a component of it, but like that to me is like, that rep and set scheme is a signal by my volume to my intensity to be high.
Yeah, of course.
Right? But people who take this and they start and fucking around, it's like, look, do you need to just do less overall volume in the week? And this is just because you feel like you're coaching someone, you have to actually just put another. It's cool to have someone do 2 exercises and go the fuck home.
Yeah.
Most of my like peaks into a meet are probably that. What are you gonna do? I'm gonna deadlift till my fucking eyes bleed, and then I'm gonna do pull-ups, and then I'm gonna leave. I'm not gonna do good mornings 3x6 at a 5 RIR, and then I'm not going to do stiff legs at an RPE 6. I'm just going to do the thing I came to do one more other thing that might help, and what will really help me is an RPE 0 falling the fuck asleep. Like, that's what'll help me. And it's just, I think it's RPE. When I see RPE as like there are psychological components to it, I understand that. But like, when I see RPE as the preeminent driver or signal of intensity in a program, I'm usually left with people who aren't getting results.
Yeah, I think like, and it's funny, like you mentioned, like some weird low RIR, like 4x3 technique day thing. Because it's like, if I program a technique day, the volume is really low. Because I'm looking to like drive a high amount of stimulus into this one thing and cut it off when the technique fails.
Right.
So it's like a technique day for me would be like 1x5 high bar back squat. It's like, how heavy can I load this movement with specific criteria around the execution? And that's the thing where I think people, you know, they start to convolute the lines of what an RPE means based on like really weird things. Like, for some reason 2 weeks ago, I had like 3 people say to me, I was like, hey, like, could you have gone up, whatever? And they're like, well, you know, like, I could have gone heavier, like, if there was a gun to my head. And I'm like, whoa, okay.
Well,
like,
you know what? That's because they've never had a gun to their head.
exactly.
That's
I was
probably
like,
what it is.
probably couldn't have squatted if there was a gun to your head. You probably would have been frozen still.
Right.
But it's like, it's this weird idea where it's like, well, I could have, barring an external motivation to do so. It's like, well, I'm not asking for that because that's not going to happen. Like, could you have gone up in the state you're in? Because it is all relative to the person. Like, you're going to drive an intensity. I'm going to drive an intensity on a lift. That's probably outside of some RPEs, but to us, it's the RPE, right? Where it's like, because that's the state I'm in when I'm lifting that weight. It's not the state I'm in when I'm doing something else. Like, for that lifter, if your RPE 8 looks like RPE 6, like, unfortunately, that's your RPE 8, because I know if we add 5 pounds, it's RPE 10. Like, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
Because you just don't understand yet how to try. So I think with RPE, there's like, a lot of it becomes, like you said, a psychological factor of self-limiting belief, but it's a lot of people providing weird criteria to it that doesn't exist.
I love, because that reminds me of the old, with plenty left in the tank. Fuck your tank.
Yeah.
Fuck
What does that
your
mean?
tank. It means you didn't try.
Yeah, like,
It
why
means
didn't you just go
try.
another set?
Right. Yeah, like, you should be able to, and I understand it's a skill acquired over time to really know what 10 is. Like,
Sure.
what is 10? What is, like, when have we just, you know, Jim Morrisoned it on to the other side? Like, when have we completely eclipsed this being something that we can overcome?
And I think that's a failure in coaching for those people to not provide them a modality to experience RPE 10.
Right.
Like, do you know who doesn't know how to do RPE 10? People who have never been on a hack squat. People who have never been on a leg press. People who do 7 barbell exercises a week, like multiple variations of a movement, because variation apparently does a magical thing outside of change the range of motion, load, and time a lift occurs in. That's a different conversation for a different day. But it's like, you know what, if your client's doing front squat, high bar squat, SSB, and they're not very good at squatting, all of those days are never going to reach RPE 10. Like, give them a really heavy dumbbell goblet squat. Like, dude, 150-pound dumbbell goblet squat is going to crush you.
Fuck you up.
I don't fucking care who you are. Like, yeah, do 20. Do it.
Yeah.
It's going to be RPE 10, right? And it's like, I have a lot of friends who are really good at jiu-jitsu. Like, the scariest people I've ever met. And it's this really funny thing they talk about with novice people who get into jiu-jitsu, which is not tapping from pressure, just the amount of like bodily pressure another person applies to you. Like there are guys that just lay on top of people and they tap. Like I have a friend that's well over 200 pounds and he doesn't do anything. He just gets on top of somebody and lays down as a dead weight, and people tap because it's so uncomfortable. But that's the idea. It's like, I think people need to learn in the weight room, like, don't tap just from the pressure, because you can probably keep moving, especially when you're in like these leveraged lifts, like low bar. Dude, low bar is going to get heavy, but if you've ever just like tried to keep moving, inevitably 9 times out of 10 it moves.
Yeah. I mean, that it comes back to the psychological and the way that like you talk about the leg press. I think machines have gotten a bad rap.
Yeah.
And maybe there's, they can be a crutch to whatever, internal stability, all that bullshit.
Whatever.
But I think it actually allows people to take the mental training wheels off.
Yeah.
Right? Because the fear of failure, if you've only ever trained on a barbell, is like, well, this could be pretty catastrophic. Like, because gym fail videos, find me a gym fail video that's not a barbell.
Yeah. Find one that's a guy in a horizontal chest press.
Right. It's like, what does he do? He just lowers it back down. Right? I've never seen someone drop a bar on their throat when they're doing a cable chest press machine.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, I think, get a little shell shock from that, and they just start to build this fear around exercise. And like a lot of these, psychologically driven, life coaches talk about, the fear mongering that comes in with like exercise and injury corrective exercise and all this stuff. Like, so it's always the same guy that's like, look, man, like we warm up on the bar, we don't do any corrective exercise because like that's fear mongering, but you keep them on a bar. It's like you're literally keeping them under the guillotine the entire fucking time, so they don't know what it's really like to let the reins off. And you won't ever be able to let the reins off on a barbell, most people, until you put them in a situation where they don't feel like they're going to get their fucking head chopped off, right? And like you said, I will go one step further and just be like, put someone on a fan bike. If you want to experience pain, like you take someone who's kind of strong on a bar and put them on a chest press, it's like, yeah, they'll be able to send it. But that's like a familiar, like they're on the outer limits of their ability of that energy system. But you want to really know what pain is? Put me on a fucking assault bike and then just tell me to go till I puke. Like that's pain. Because again, there's a somewhat of a skill, relatively speaking, to a leg press compared to an assault bike. Mm-hmm. The thing just does what it does. Like it's completely just going to keep going in circles, and it'll keep going in circles even if you don't want to. Yeah, your legs will just go there like a dead cat on a treadmill. Like you're still fucking going. So I think that's always a way to recalibrate intensity. Is like, all right, you seem like you're getting a little bit soft. And whether you have this conversation with your client or not, but again, you can just have intensity be a byproduct. Right?
Yeah. And that's like, it's funny you brought up the assault bike thing, because with a general population of people, what I would always do at the end of our sessions is put people on like the Concept 2 rower for 60 seconds and just go as hard as you can. Yeah. And then just do a Tabata on the rowing machine, because like RPE is something that is like very much driven from a cardiovascular environment. Like long distance running is RPE based most of the time. Yeah. So it's like we're taking a scale of intensity driven by something that we've done our entire lives, move our legs forward and backward, and we're applying it to weights. So now there's a washout period of understanding, right? We're taking something we're unskilled in, and we're applying an intensity that applies to gait cycle, and we're trying to match the two. Well, I don't understand how to do this movement, and I'm now trying to apply something foreign. There's a massive washout, which we see, and it takes so long to learn. But you can teach RPE by bringing someone back to a skill they inherently have. Right. The assault bike, left in front of right, the treadmill, bike sprints, C2 rower, like these cardiovascular pieces of equipment. I don't think it contributes to longevity. I don't think it contributes to whatever, but I think it contributes to understanding intensity. Like, you ever been just run as hard as you can on a treadmill and then all of a sudden you taste blood and you get shin splints? Like, oh shit, that was RPE 10. Like, you know, when you do cardio, when you want it to end. Right. It's inevitable. You're like, I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah. Please take me home.
And you'll realize that all the times you've ended a set prior to that feeling,
that exact feeling,
a lie.
Exactly.
And then it's a calibration tool, and I think it's something that can just be controlled. Like, I really think it would be an interesting experiment to just not prescribe weights and just like for 3 days of a first week of training with someone, be like, okay, your only exercise is go in and just go 5 minutes as hard as you can.
Yeah.
And then just, I don't know, read me out the statistics on the screen at the end and see if we get any movement. And that'll help us at least calibrate out of the gate. And if I think that you're getting a little bit soft or like succumbing to the fear of, you know, the consequences that you tell yourself if you fail on a barbell. I know people that fail on barbells all the time. They don't care. Like sometimes it's the fear of like, oh no, I don't want to get judged for dropping a bar in a gym. Fair enough. Don't bend the bar. I know people that drop bars all the time. They're like, well, I didn't want to do it anymore, so I just dropped it. It was like this guy's like hailing a cab when the bar is still bouncing in the rack. I was like, all right, I guess. But I know that guy, his RPEs are exactly where they should be. Because he's like, well, he found 10.1 and he left. So, but I think a lot of times we just get so reliant on the 5x6 at, right? Like the at is really what I think fucks people on their program. It's like, not that you don't go in prescribed, but I think a good coach could just reverse engineer what these numbers are based off of volume and intensity, right? Volume, intensity, density. And then, a subjective understanding of what your client does. Like, hey, I work construction at 12 hours. Like, okay, I just need to equate that into the overall volume that will, again, just leave the intensity as a byproduct. Intensity is a byproduct. It's not a goal. And everyone treats it as the goal, and they never get there because they're not considering all of the other variables that equate and solve for intensity.
Yeah, like I just think if everybody trained 1 rep in reserve, if you just walked into every session with 1 RIR in mind and just trained the sets and reps, you inevitably auto-regulate the overall intensity.
Right.
Because you're like, oh, I have to do 3 more sets of this? Well, this is 1 rep in reserve on this set because I have to not drop the weight and get 3 more sets. You're not going to send it to the back of the stadium. And like, so maybe you undershoot the first week. You add 2.5 next week. And maybe you get closer to accuracy. In the 3rd week, you get closer. The 4th week, you're there.
Yeah.
Now stay there.
Stay there.
Stay there.
Stay there. Stay there. And we'll have to do a podcast just on deloading because it's hilarious to me because I know people who deload just reflexively out of pure laziness every 4 weeks. And it's like we finally arrived at the macro cycle version of the inner set feeling that Cody described to you, right? Like in the set of leg press where you're like, 5 was really uncomfortable. And Cody goes, set starts now. Progress from a macro perspective in training is the same thing. It's like, oh, the first week I was kind of figuring out, maybe like relearning some of these movements that I hadn't seen in a while in a new training block. 2nd week, getting a little bit more comfortable. 3rd, 4th week, I start to hit the nail a little closer to the head as far as my intensity being a representation of all of the other variables, right? Like a byproduct of all these other variables. And then what does the coach do? Pulls the fucking rug out from under you and then goes, all right, we're going to switch it up. Why? We've arrived at the starting line, right? It's like now all of a sudden you're just going to move me into another race where I got to relearn a new skill and recalibrate an RPE based off of a whole new fluctuation of intensities across new exercises. It's like that would be if like you got to that point in your set and Cody was like, all right, you're done.
Stop.
And it's like, and you can tell the people that do that. You can tell the clients or the coaches that program this way because it just ends up being like basically a 3-week deload for some sub-maximal intensity peak week that's really them just arriving, not finishing, just arriving at the starting line. It's like, all right, now we're going to grind this out and we're going to chip it for a few weeks and we're going to like start to have the intensity represent itself in different ways rather than just fucking pulling the plug. Because I mean, coaches are scared and coaches are afraid because they think people are fragile. Yeah. Right? Like, I've watched, what did Steve Gentili drop like 585 on his chest or some crazy bullshit like that? And it's just like, whoa, whew. All right. Yeah. I had a buddy message me the other day. My buddy Calvin from California he trains at Colorado, the big gym, Armburst.
Oh, yeah.
He dropped 385 on his chest.
Love it.
Like, and they caught it on the security camera he sent him. He's like, dude, what happened? And it's like, you dropped it on your chest. I don't know, man. I don't know what to tell you. But like the savage thing is, fucking guy, like his girl, 3 guys run, grab it. This girl's trying to deadlift 385 off his chest. I was like, dude, well, he didn't think he was going to drop it. He's strong as fuck. He's like, that should have been easy, but rolled out of his hands. Dusts himself off, and in the same video, takes it off and finishes his set.
Right, sick.
Because the guy's like, all right, am I dead? No? Great.
Yeah.
I always think of the story that Derek Woodsky told us about when he was living in Saudi Arabia. And he's like, man, there's such a difference in culture. He goes, we were on the runway in Riyadh to head out, and an RPG had exploded really close to the airport. And you could see all the glass in the terminal waving from the pressure. And everyone was like ducking, freaking out, and like, basically like the flight attendant came on, like, cross-checking all call. All right, and like, let's get this bitch in the air. And they just took off. There was like, anyone dead?
Yeah.
Nope. All right, let's go. Wheels up. We're not doing ourselves any good by sitting on this fucking runway while the RPGs are flying. So they just took off. And it's the same thing with coaches. Like, it's always the coach that has built a fragile narrative around their own training.
It's either the coach who builds a narrative around their own training, or the coach who feels there's no credibility in posting their training.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a weird one.
Step up, step out. That's what coaching is,
get.
man. You got to go out into the middle of the plane. You got to expose yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's why the number one fear of people is public speaking. Imagine stepping out on the planes.
Imagine hiring a tradesperson and then being like, there's no value in seeing my previous work.
Yeah.
Like, hey, can I check out a kitchen you remodeled? No value in that.
Yeah, no.
Might as well trust me based on theoretical.
look at my Instagram post where I put up all the words.
I've got a stud finder.
Yeah.
And I've got a tape, so I don't see what else you need from me.
Yeah, and
it's the same two people.
It adds new definition to your body of work. Like, my body of work is I can tell you the clients I've worked with. Sure. You want to go that game, but I could also tell you the client I've worked with the longest.
It's me.
This fucking guy. And it's like, I've learned a few things along the way, and like, I'll tell you where 10 is. I'll tell you where 11 is. I'll tell you where 13 is. 13 is on the floor of Boss Barbell Club in Mountain View, where 40% of my pec still resides, right? So I can calibrate that for me, and I think I have a better idea to calibrate that in other people, or at least to know what the tools of calibration are.
That's all it is.
And it's just the dishonesty that comes with that. And ultimately it's like everything. It starts at the level of individual, and the dishonesty of a coach who tells himself that fable. Like, just that fucking lie that, like, oh yeah, no, I'm not gonna, my training doesn't matter. It's like, then you're telling your clients that their training doesn't matter. Right. And then what an insult that is. But yeah, no, come get coached by me. Like, fuck you.
And like, it's not an extension. It's so weird, right? Because I think people want to treat training like an art at times. Like, there's a nuance to it that not everybody can do, which makes it an art. Yeah. Like, if this was so objective, it'd be a factory, and we'd all spit out things and everything would work. But for people to differentiate themselves, there has to be a level of nuance or art or mastery to it, which is like, I always think of an artist, and like, what ends up on a canvas is an extension not of the brush, but of Picasso holding the brush. So it's like, you can't just tell me that your knowledge of the barbell, which exists between you and the load and the movement, there isn't a thing here that matters to me as a person. Right. They're fucking right is a thing there that matters to me. Like, I want to know that thing that you do between here and the load going up and down. Not that, like, you fucking know how to write in a spreadsheet. Yeah. Or, like, you can explain to me how dead guys move.
Yeah, you need. Oh, dude, the fucking pelvic model coaches drive me insane. Because it's like, what I'm buying is the conduit. Right, I'm buying the conduit that delivers the spreadsheet. Yeah. Right, like, you're buying the arm that swings the hammer. You're not buying the hammer, but everyone on Instagram is selling you the hammer. It's like, I don't want to see the hammer. It's like, show me like the calloused hand and the fucking massive forearm that swings the hammer. That's what I want. And everyone's like, well, if you see the sacroiliac joint doesn't, like, dude, I don't care. Like, and it's so funny. It's like, I can tell you're not good with people because all of your models are in your room with a skeleton. It's like, well, if you had any clients at all, or if you were afraid to step up and step the fuck out, because that's my biggest thing. It's like, yeah, I understand. It's been a while since I've given a fuck, but I understand the trepidation that comes with putting yourself on social media. Sure. I get it. Yeah, man. I was there. I remember doing stuff with Craig Capurso on his YouTube channel. Shit, I've been outside of school now this 7 years. 7 years I've been out of school. And I started with him, training with him probably 9 years ago. I maybe had my first thing go up on YouTube. And I'm not exaggerating, I did not sleep. The entire night, I just stayed up on my laptop and hit the refresh button to see if someone left an angry comment. But then, and they did. They absolutely did.
course.
And it was the fucking, unknown 4837. And it was a picture of the guy's cat. And I was like, all right, well, this guy's not stepping up.
Yeah.
This guy's not stepping up. And all of a sudden, people are like, there's no half measure. Like, if you're going to do it, just fucking do it. But you'll have more confidence in it if you're actually not lying to yourself. And I think the people who don't step up know, because you always know when you tell a lie, right?
Yeah.
Like, you always know when you're lying to someone, and you always know when someone's lying to you, right? Like you feel that. And I mean, kind of flies in the face of what we said earlier, but it's like, you at the very least know when you're lying to yourself. Because I do this sometimes. I'll sit with myself and be like, it's always like, are things going to be okay? Like, that's literally like, oh, fuck, like, I'm doing a lot of shit. Like, is this going to work? That's always like a question I ask myself. And there are times where I think like, is this going to work? And I'm like, yeah, this will work. And there's a little candle flame of doubt back here. And that thing just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And within like 2 minutes, I go, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a good vibe. Like, we'll be around people. And I'll ask you, be like, yo, what's the hot take on this guy? And you're like, trash. And I'm just like, and sometimes it takes me months, years, and then all of a sudden you're like, you were right. But I had that, and I only ask you, I feel like, when I have that doubt.
Yeah.
Because if I don't have the doubt, it's like, you probably feel the same way as me. And it's always, but like, everyone knows. And it's like, if you're listening to this and you're that fucking guy, it's like, you got two options. Like, either like step up or just step off. Like, get the fuck out of here. And it's so annoying to see coaches, because you're just a predator. Like, you're just preying on people if you bring that kind of mentality, because you're going to foster all of these weaknesses, all of these insecurities. You're just going to compound them and create a codependency. Like, I love people being like, yo, like, I think I'm good. Like, I think I kind of got it. Like,
I've never been upset about that. I'm like, please go ahead. Contact me anytime.
Fly. Like, get the fuck, and that opens up my roster for another person. Where it's like, if you've been coaching the same person year in, year out for years, and like, look, I can understand that from like to a certain degree, but if you're like lording over these values that are outside of your scope, and you're really not doing what you should be doing as a coach, it's like, reevaluate, man. Like, it's so predatory to me, and it gives the industry a bad name.
And I think, like, man, there's a point with people, and like, I've coached some people for a long time, but it's like, you'll send them a program, and it's like, you check in with them, you're like, how are things going? They're like, things are going great, like, added load. And it's just like, okay, well, if this volume is working for you, if these exercises are working for you, it's like, I'm not going to change anything. Right. Like, just go do it again, and do it again, and do it again, and do it again, and then message me when doing it again stops working. Right. And then we'll change it. Yeah. But this idea that we need to micromanage and microcycle and create these small deviations and things, it's like, just do it again. Yeah. Do it again. And like, if you get a client who gets to that point where you can send them exercises and they're like, yeah, this is great, I can repeat this next week and add load. It's like, that's when you know, like, whatever piece of the puzzle you needed to educate in terms of intensity or learning how to try, it's like, you did it. Because that guy went in the next week and did the same exercise with the same reps and added load. Like, he's now training. He is no longer learning. Yeah,
he can solve the equation. He can solve the equation of intensity.
Yeah.
And that's really what it should be. And I think coaches create that codependency for solving that for them. Right? They solve that equation for them, like, this RIR, this RPE, this percentage. And it's like, you're doing them a disservice. Is you need to teach them how to solve that equation themselves. That was probably the best rap.
Easily.
That's it. I think there's no more conversation to be had.
No.
Anyone ever wants to talk RP, RIR, reps in reserve, or reps or rate of perceived exertion, just reference this podcast.
Yeah, just leave your address in the comments.
Yeah, and we'll come show up. I'll show you the arm that swings the hammer.
That's right.
All right. Well, hey, big shout out to Lunderjack Production for staying awake during this, dog. I saw you. You're making it happen. All right, that's a wrap. We'll see you next week.